Welcome back, Honors. All right, welcome back to it. Just had a great S period sitting down, talking to Gianna and Christina and Lily and Damari and Molly and Jernigan. Ugh, Molly, that sounds weird. So we were discussing like the essay, little bits of stuff like that. I definitely did talk to Jernigan though. I am going to create a rubric, and then I'm also going to create. I'm going to post about it on Google Classroom so you can kind of just have something to reference, and I'll have a prompt on there and stuff like that. But as I talked to Lily and Gianna and Damari and Molly and Christina, I think everybody's starting to realize it's like that this essay is probably a lot easier than you realize. And they came in and like 5 of the 26 of y'all or whatever are kind of now already off to the right foot. So if you want some help, if you want to have some ideas, if you want to have a little brainstorming session with me, just come on in during S period and we'll figure this thing out, right? But let's pick off exactly where we left off in class when we were talking about the Persian Wars, right? So the big thing, though, is we left off talking about this type of vessel, right? We talked about how the Athenians, after the first Persian invasion, also known as the Second Persian War, which I know can be confusing, but don't let it break your brain, are going to actually build up a very, very large naval fleet, and it's going to be made up completely of these things called triremes, right? Now, tri meaning 3 and referring to the levels of oars and levels of the ship, right? So triremes, though, their main weapon of choice was this bronze battering ram here on the front, right? They actually would ram into other ships and use this bronze battering ram that actually was underneath the water to pop a hole in the enemy ship and sink it, right? Also, they decorated it with large eyes to make the thing look like a sea monster, and it was a very, very large, intimidating vessel. And actually, the very first people to ever make them were the Phoenicians. And so where do you think the Greeks learned how to make them? The Phoenicians, cultural diffusion. Speaking of stuff that we still use that you could definitely use in that essay, the phonetic alphabet that the Greeks learned to use, that they also did that, is then the basis of our alphabet. So, take that. Now, anyway, going forward, though, then there's going to be a massive, humongous event known as the Second Persian Invasion, a.k.a. the Third Persian War. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of sneak up here a little bit just so you can see a couple of little bullet-pointed summary pieces about this big thing, okay? So first of all, big cause of the Second Persian Invasion is going to be the fact that the Persians yet again want revenge on the Greeks for actually stopping them at the Battle of Marathon, right? But interesting little fact, though, it's not actually Darius anymore. By this point in history, Darius is already dead, right? So, like, Darius is dead, and his son has now taken over. So in these little list of bullet points, you definitely need to jot this down really, really fast. His son, Xerxes, is now coming after the Greeks, right? And Xerxes decides that he wants to attack Athens by both land and by sea. So Xerxes decides at this point that he is going to go and invade Greece by going through a land route and a sea route. So if you look right here, this is the land route, right? The little dotted line that went from the Persian Empire all the way through Thrace, which a very important character that we'll talk about here in a second, named the Fealties of Thrace, was actually apparently from. He wanted to launch his land invasion all the way over through here and then march in on Athens in this direction. And then he wanted to launch a sea and a naval invasion from this direction and show up right here, right? So the big thing that's going to end up going down, though, is the fact, as you can see, Darius's fleet is the one that came in right here in 490. That is where the Battle of Marathon occurred, right 26 miles from Athens. And then as you can see right here, they are going to get very close to Athens yet again. But this is not going to be Darius's invasion. This is his son's invasion, Xerxes. Remember that time we talked about how Xerxes told everybody to go out in the water? And he was like, bad water, bad water. It actually apparently happened right there, right? When they launched their invasion, this right here, this strait that actually leads into the Black Sea, it's called the Strait of Dardanelles. Actually right here is where he had the land bridge built that was destroyed in a flood, and he literally had the water whipped for being so bad for destroying his land bridge. It actually occurred right there. So Xerxes decides that he is going to go and he's going to challenge the Athenians, he's going to challenge them, and he believes that he is going to destroy them. Now, in a long run, spoiler alert, he does actually end up getting there. Later on, after a very, very all-important battle known as the Battle of Thermopylae, which we'll talk about here in a second, Athens does get burned, right? Athens is actually destroyed basically to the ground. Some parts of it are left, but when the Persians get there, the Athenians are not there. The Athenians had abandoned the city because they knew that the Persians were on their way. Now, very interesting fact, though, is the fact that there was a major battle that was fought that actually was tried to save Athens from being destroyed. And interestingly enough, it was led not by an Athenian general, but by a Spartan general. The Spartan King Leonidas, right? King Leonidas decides that he is going to go out and he is going to try and stop the Persians before they ever actually even get in to that area of Greece, lower Greece towards Athens, right? So Hollywood wants you to believe that King Leonidas looks like this, okay? So if you've ever seen the film 300, which you probably haven't, it's a Frank Miller graphic novel that's actually made about the Battle of Thermopylae, where King Leonidas, this man apparently led his men to a very, very large victory over the Persians. Ha, psych, just kidding, they actually lost, all right? So now the Spartans are actually going to end up losing this battle, but they fought to the very last man, okay? And so what they ended up causing against the Persians is this thing known as a Pyrex Victory, right? So the Persians are going to end up using a lot of men and a lot of resources to try and get through the Spartan army, and the Spartans did what they needed to do, which was slow the Persians down and actually prevent them from getting to Athens while people were still there. And why do you think the Spartans actually wanted to stop them from getting to Athens? Because if you didn't notice on the map a second ago, if you actually look, that's Augustus, if you actually look really, really closely right here, Sparta is not very far from Athens. So the second that you actually end up taking over Athens, it is a very, very reasonable chance that the Spartans believe that they could possibly be next. So the big thing the Spartans wanted to do was to at least slow the Persians down and stop them before they could actually get completely there, which would then eventually have threatened Sparta itself. Now, King Leonidas, though, did not actually look like this. More than likely, he actually looked like something more like this, and also, this is even not necessarily accurate, because Leonidas was 60 years old at the Battle of Thermopylae, which means he was actually very, very old, right? Especially for 480 BC, he's going to be very, very old, right? When in 480 BC, when you're 60, you're basically walking into this battle like, get him. Now, anyway, when it all goes down, though, according to legend and myth and things like that, according to the entire, shebang, there we go, according to the entire event, according to the Greeks anyway, there were 6,000 Spartans versus 200,000 Persians. So they were heavily, heavily, heavily outnumbered. And what's going to end up going down in this battle is the Spartans apparently placed themselves directly on the ridge of this place called Thermopylae. So Thermopylae is actually an area that is located on the ridge of a very large lake. And let me look it up real quick. So Thermopylae map. All right, so what ends up going down, though, is the Spartans decide to place themselves on a narrow strip of land. No, wait, where are you going? Why are you doing that? So they decide to place themselves on a narrow strip of land next to this very, very large lake, right? So here we go. Next to this, not lake, but a part of the ocean, the Malayan Gulf, right? And so Thermopylae, as you can see, the areas had been receding over time. And so what they decided to do is they wanted to place themselves right here, okay? So the Spartans were like, we only have 6,000 troops, so if we place ourselves right here, we'll be able to have the water on one side and the mountains on the other, and the Persians will have to bottleneck their forces together to try and destroy our army. And what we'll do is we'll basically just use our phalanx system to keep slowing them down over and over and over again. So as you can see, they used the geography of Thermopylae to their massive advantage. And so going in this entire thing, you can actually see what ended up happening, though, in the long run. And what ended up going down is the Persians actually figured out a way to come up behind the Spartans. I can't actually find this map for some reason, which is really annoying, but I'll show it to you in class. So they're going to end up finding a way to come up behind the Spartans, and they actually end up destroying the entire Spartan army, but not before losing a heavy, heavy, heavy amount of men, right? So King Leonidas led the Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae to try and slow the Persians down, and even though all the Spartans died and lost this battle, they at least dealt enough damage onto the Persians to slow them down enough to prevent them from ever being able to invade Sparta, and eventually weakening their forces enough to the point to where the Persians would eventually lose this invasion. Because at this battle right here, the Battle of Salamis, or the Strait of Salamis, Athens used its new large navy to destroy a Persian fleet, and what's going to end up happening is the Persian land army and the fleet, the naval fleet, has to run away, and they retreat back to Persia, right? Now, the Persian wars are very important because as we can see right now, oh, this is an image of the Battle of Thermopylae. See what I'm talking about? Mountains on one side, water on the other. Use that geography, people. Now, going into it, though, the second Persian, no, you don't need that. The second Persian invasion is going to have massive outcomes that are going to affect the progression of Greek history dramatically, right? So the results particularly is Athens is going to dramatically increase its status among the city-states. Now, a lot of this has to do with the fact that the very dynamic victory at the Strait of Salamis, which is where they're going to use their navy to actually repel the Persian fleet, is going to kind of encourage a lot of people to join this military alliance that the Athenians were talking about making. So the Athens wanted to create a permanent alliance between several of the city-states in Greece, but they wanted to be in charge of it, right? Sparta saw this as a threat. Sparta was like, we did not just come help you to prevent us from being taken over, for you to create an alliance that could possibly be raised up to attack us later on. Sparta did not like the culture of Athens, did not like their democratic values, did not like the idea that their entire culture was not based in military tradition, rank and file, right? They wanted their culture to be the one that, one, either was propagated, or two, they wanted to be left alone, right? They wanted for Athens to stay where they were and not bother them in the progression of them taking over small settlements that are nearby them, and then also using their methods to keep themselves sustained. So with this, though, the Athenians did not listen. They did not pay attention to the Spartans at all, and they ended up forming this alliance in spite of them. And what they formed was this thing known as the Delian League, right? The Delian League is going to get formed, and what that is the military alliance that the Athenians create to keep themselves safe away from Persian invasion, right? This was headed by a very, very famous guy that we'll talk about here in this flip today. His name was Pericles, right? And Pericles of Athens headed this thing up to defend from further Persian invasion, also to spread their ideas, and you had to have a democracy to be within this alliance, right? So Athens is forcing the cultural diffusion of their government and of their ideas onto these other people using this thing known as the Delian League, right? And they also start to collect dues from the member states. So, like, if you want to be in our alliance and you want to use our naval fleet to protect yourself from a future Persian invasion, that was never really a threat again after Xerxes left, right? After Xerxes failed the second Persian invasion, i.e. the Third Persian War, they were never really truly a threat anymore. And so the fact that Athens is collecting money from these member states begs the question of how do you think Athens is going to end up using this money, right? And they don't use it in productive ways to protect those other city-states. They end up using it to rebuild the city of Athens in way too much glamour and way too much stock, and to basically create a city-state that would be the epitome of Greek culture and art and progression and blah, 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 and oh, I don't know, the suppression of women. So Sparta is furious about this. They are furious because they feel that Athens is now standing as a threat to their way of life, and they believe that if Athens gains enough steam, they might actually end up trying to take over Sparta as well. And Sparta, we all know, would win that fight, but we can see on the horizon what is happening is the brewing of tensions between Sparta and Athens, which will eventually lead to war, right? So just giving you a heads up, the formation of the Delian League is an early indication that the Athenians and the Spartans would eventually go to war with one another, right? And so then we entered a period known as Classical Greece, which was very short-lived, very, very short time period, only lasting for about less than 100 years, right? But it also strikes this kind of node as being this idea of being the epitome of classical growth and Greek culture, right? So the classical period is what we enter into right after the Persian Wars are over, right? This is a time when Greeks began to achieve new heights in art, architecture, theater, and philosophy. This section, classical Greece, is the thing that we base so much of our modern Western world off of. So this flip and the next day in class are going to be things that we can reference at any time in your essay so you can better understand everything going on, right? So this is going to be that time when they achieve all these new heights and all these things that are now still currently impacting us today, right? So with the classical period, though, you got to understand that it couldn't start right out the gate, right? It couldn't just like pop up and go right into it. They had to clean up after these Persian wars, right? So after the Persians failed to invade Greece, not once, not twice, but, well, not once, but twice, and also after they failed to, well, they crushed a rebellion, which was pretty quick, so you could technically say that the Persians won the first one. But they had to clean up after these wars, right? Because the results of the Persian wars are going to be, one, you've got some cities that need to be rebuilt. Greece also, though, the positive is now free from Persian rule, right? Now that the Greeks don't have to worry about the Persians in the east threatening to take them over or come in at any time, this is going to give time for the Greeks to slowly develop and grow and reach new cultural heights, okay? Greek city-states now that we also know are in an alliance known as the Delian League. Sparta is slowly starting to build an alliance of their own to try and protect themselves from Athens, right? But we'll talk about the Peloponnesian League is what they're called a little bit later on. Now, the Athenians have a naval fleet of over 200 vessels, which makes them a dominant power in the entire Aegean Sea, and it also spurs forward their ability to colonize and expand their influence, right? And this classical period is mostly known as a huge amount of growth for Athens. Following the Persian Wars, Athens goes through a major period of growth, right? So the question that you're begging to ask yourself right now is definitely the idea of, wait a second, Mr. Terry, put it in reverse. Back up.
Bag up, Terry. Put it in reverse, Terry. Put it in reverse. Oh, Lord, Jesus. Oh, Lord. Oh, Jesus. What you doing, Terry?
So if any of y'all have ever seen that one, it's one of my favorite ones. I know several of you have probably actually seen that video before. But basically, yeah, back up, Mr. Terry, put it in reverse. Why didn't Sparta just step in immediately after the Persian Wars, using their army, and just strike at Athens then and try to destroy them early on? Well, the reason why is because Sparta had bad timing. Sparta got hit by a massive earthquake and a Helot rebellion in 464. So literally right after less than 10 years after the Persian War started, by the time that Sparta would have been able to actually go out and attack and destroy Athens and actually check them and prevent them from growing their Delian League too large, they got hit by this massive earthquake that destroyed huge amounts of the Spartan home city. And then also the Helots used this as a chance, and as we know, the Helots are the slaves of the Spartans, used this as a chance to rebel against them in 464 BC, which leads to Sparta, very out of character, calling for aid to suppress the rebellion and help rebuild Athens. They apparently at one point called to Athens and said, "We need troops to suppress this Helot rebellion to rebuild our city because we have just been devastated by this earthquake." And then Athens sent 4,000 troops with the hopes of trying to encourage them to join the Delian League and suppress them and become the dominant power within all of Greece. Had Athens got there and then convinced Sparta to join the Delian League, it wouldn't really be considered Athens versus Sparta anymore. It would have just been Athens, and we might be actually talking about just the growth of the only Greeks known as the Athenians, right? So the interesting part, though, is that when the troops landed to actually get there to help the Spartans, the Athenian troops were met on the shoreline by 2 Spartan soldiers that then said, "Actually, we don't need you anymore." And they sent the Athenian troops back. Just rubbed it in Athens' face. They were like, "We're just going to probably end up executing a lot of these Helots. We'll rebuild it on our own. Get out of our face." But this rivalry keeps growing. But the interesting part about it is during this period of growth known as the classical period, Athens was free from any threat. The Persians are not going to come anymore. The Spartans are busy rebuilding their city and getting more Helots so they can actually function as their own economy and culture. So Athens was left alone to grow and prosper. You don't need this top line. It's annoying. But what ended up going down is you saw the entrance of another major figure in Athenian and Greek history, right? Because there was a ruler in Athens known as Simon, and he was one of the archons. And what happened was he's one of the ones that sent these troops to Sparta. They got sent back. The people of Athens thought he was not a good leader, so they ostracized him, right? They actually held a vote, and they ostracized Simon out completely. But then when they started to vote to bring someone back in, they voted in one of the most dominant and intense figures in all of Greek history. And his name literally refers to a period of time known as the Age of Pericles, right? Pericles is the leader of Athens that leads them into the promised golden age of the classical period, right? And I said Pericles. His name is Pericles. It is not Pericles. If you come up into my class be saying Pericles, I'm going to take Lily's baby hands, I'm going to throw them at you, all right? His name is not Pericles, it's Pericles, okay? So Pericles induces the idea of classical Athens, of classical Athenian growth. And the age of Pericles is a very long one at that. It lasts about 30 years due to the fact that Pericles was elected Archon 29 times in a row. If you are elected Archon 29 times in a row, you obviously must be doing some stuff really good, right? So what ends up going down is this is Pericles right here, and you can actually see that he has military influence with the helmet on his back, and we have several of these busts left over. They haven't been destroyed. Whenever we find a lot of busts of a certain figure left behind throughout history, it means that the leader must have been a very positive one, because whenever we have, like, Khufu, remember that? Do we have lots of, like, statues of Khufu left around? We don't. because they hated him, right? So the Athenians loved Pericles, on the other hand, because he led to a lot of very, very, very intense accomplishments, right? One of the big ones is he had a giant system of walls built around Athens and their naval base, using money he got from the Delian League. He also had the Acropolis of Athens rebuilt completely and had a brand new building dedicated to Athena built in its stead. And that place is known famously as the Parthenon, right? So write it down, very important. The Parthenon, and then highlight the Parthenon. The Parthenon is considered one of the biggest heights and biggest feats of ancient Greek engineering because it's literally created using absolutely no mortar between any of this stuff, and it's all in a completely marble temple dedicated to the Temple of Athena. Had over 40 different columns inside of it, and used the weight of the pedimented roof on the top to hold the entire thing together. And it served as the beacon of the new Athens during the classical period. And it is what the Lincoln Memorial and what the White House is designed based off of. The Parthenon became kind of an architectural standard in Western civilizations in general. And inside of the Parthenon, they had a statue of Athena built out of ivory and gold. And ivory and gold are two of the richest materials on the planet. Ivory being that of elephant tusks, and gold, of course, being gold, right? So, and the thing was 40 feet tall and would be worth in the modern era of billions of dollars. This is what we believe that the Statue of Athena probably looked like, but we don't know because it's a replica of it that was actually built in Nashville, Tennessee. There's actually a full replica of the Parthenon built in Nashville, Tennessee, with this inside of it, right? So why there? I don't know, but Nashville, Tennessee has a Parthenon replica and this replica of the Statue of Athena. This statue, if it was actually still around, would be worth in the billions of dollars, right? But we don't know where it is right now, mainly due to the fact that we believe that it was probably taken or destroyed by the Romans eventually. And then also Pericles is going to reform the government. But what we're going to do is we're going to pick up right there whenever we start talking about this stuff in class. We'll talk more about the Age of Pericles, and we'll also start talking about the three big philosophers. But I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.